guess good afternoon and good morning to my my co-leaders, Christian and Hitoshi. Thanks for joining. Let's start off with, we want to have a couple of updates. We'll go in alphabetical order, I guess. We'll do Brazil and then Canada. So from Brazil, we have Marcela and Carla of Tozini, and welcome them to give us an update on Brazil and the data protection and privacy landscape.
So we have this new law. It's quite recent for us, and companies in Brazil are still in the process of being conformity with this law. And but at the same time, we have a lot of activities from our authority. This is a new authority, right? A privacy authority. We didn't have one before. And so we have some rules that were enacted, some actions from them, and we wanted to talk to you about that. But the first point that we wanted to mention is that now in Brazil, privacy has been included as one of our fundamental rights. And that for us is a big change. Why is it a big change? Because obviously gives much more strength to privacy, right? It shows how important it is. But not only because of that, but when you have a right, which is a constitutional right, if there is ever a lawsuit, you may be entitled to dispute an issue connected to privacy in all the superior courts in Brazil. So in terms of litigation, on one hand, this is very good because allows plaintiffs to go into the superior court. On the other hand, obviously for companies which may be sued by them, this can be a bigger issue. But in any event, we see this as a victory for privacy in Brazil. We see this as a step in the right direction, and as also evidence of how strong and how important privacy is in Brazil.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this happened just last week, so everybody was celebrating that in Brazil. Was
all the privacy attorneys will be there. Everybody meeting the privacy attorneys. That's it.
And now we just wanted to, because we know that you may or may not be familiar with the law, but for us, what was important to share today is the recent developments of our data protection authority in Brazil, because as we mentioned, the law was enacted in 2018, but it only came into force at the end of 2020. So we have a little bit more of 1 year of the law enforceable, but the Data Protection Authority was organized in a later stage. So there was a lot of expectations on what regulations they would issue, whether they would start already investigating and applying penalties, and the authority started with a very good posture. I mean, they emphasized that they would like to focus on education and not on applying penalties. So they published a regulatory agenda, a strategic planning, and they are working a lot, I mean, in issuing guidelines and doing consultations to the society in order to prepare and issue regulations as well. So this last year, what we had the authority publishing guidance, which is not a formal regulation, but it's a guidance material which is very relevant because in a certain way it comes from the authority, so we can rely on that. They're providing guidance on processing of personal data by public authorities, because our law is also applicable to public authorities. Guidance on data breach notification, even though we do not have yet a regulation, we do have an article in the law saying, talking about the obligation to notify a data incident, but we do not have a regulation with the details on that.
But people are notifying.
Yeah.
In fact, ourselves, we have already done notifications for clients, And we have noticed that there's been many notifications, throughout this year.
Yes, and they provided a form of notification in their website and some preliminary guidelines on that. But still there is some doubts in the sense of when you need to notify, but in fact, a lot of companies are notifying data breaches. They also provided guidance on the application of the law by processing agents in the electoral context, because this is an electoral year for us. And we know there are a lot of discussions on that because of social media. Guidelines on data processing agents, for instance, the definition of controller and processor, because this is a concept that we did not have in Brazil before the LGPD. So they provided some guidelines and examples, for people to better identify when you have a controller, when you have a data processor, and also a general guideline aimed to the consumers on how to protect your personal data, because also recent years in Brazil were years that were known as having a lot of incidents, a lot of
data breach. And as you may know, Brazil is one of the biggest countries with respect to access to internet. So Brazilians are crazy for e-commerce, social media. They're very active. So at the same time, obviously, we have one of the biggest data breaches incidents here too.
Yeah, and in connection with the regulations, I mean, there were fewer, but because first they needed to issue their internal regulations regarding their internal processes and how they would be structured, and they did that. So they are well organized now. And they issued a regulation on the supervisory process and administrative sanctioning process. So now that we have the administrative process for the application of fines duly regulated, the expectation is that now this year, the authority will start investigating, and formally starting those procedures in order to verify whether any penalties should be applicable, but still they emphasize that they will focus first on correcting, any possible violation before applying any penalties. And the more recent one was the one regarding the application of the law to small processing agents. So startups, small companies, because there was some doubt in connection whether the law should be applied in the same way to these companies, and they provided the regulation somehow flexibilizing that.
They waived some, in Brazil, for instance, just to give an idea, all the companies in Brazil, in principle, needed to have a GPO, and obviously this could be, something of a burden for startups, for smaller companies. So with this guidance, now we understood that they can have a smaller type of structure. They need to comply with the law, but in a way that is much more flexible than obviously much bigger companies. So that was also something of a win for us with respect to how the law has been happening.
Yeah, the authority, even though they have not applied any penalties yet, and we do not have in the news, much cases of administrative cases started by them, they informed in their website that they started investigating some major data breach cases that were noticed in Brazil, because the public, also the society, always goes to them, and whenever there is a data breach, a major data breach, will the authority do anything? And so they
expect the authority, they expect the authority to act. Basically.
Yeah, so they inform that they are acting in these cases, requesting information and investigating, but nothing concrete up to this moment coming from the authority. Now we have, in addition to the authority, we also have other authorities in Brazil, especially the ones, the consumer protection authorities, and these ones, they're active in data
Yeah.
protection.
And obviously you can all read Portuguese, most of you probably can't, but what we have here in the news is basically news talking about data breaches, talking about amounts paid by companies with respect to data breaches, and also with respect to our PROCON, it's a consumer authority, so showing how this consumer authority is very active. And this is pretty much how the Brazilian legal system works. You don't have only one authority leading cases with respect to privacy. You have the authority with an administrative, let's say, position, but you also have the courts and consumer authorities, prosecutors, which can also act. And because of that, unfortunately, we are one of the most litigious countries. So we have a lot of litigation with respect to privacy already.
And then just to finalize, I mean, we expect that 2022 will be a great year and that we will have many developments, because this is the year where we expect the Data Protection Authority to actually start enforcement and possibly apply penalties. Maybe we also expect the authority to issue more regulation, because we still need regulation, for instance, on data subject rights, international data transfer, which is something that would be very important for us, because we do not have yet any adequacy decisions, any approved model clauses or something like that. So basically what we have is an empty article regarding international transfers.
Yes. We don't even have a list of countries that we can transfer or that we cannot.
Yeah. And also guidance on the preparation of DPIAs, regulation on DPO. So, and all these are mentioned in the regulatory agenda of the authority. So there is an actual expectation that they issue regulation on that this year. So that's basically it. We just wanted to bring some context and the main news on the topic.
That's great. Really well done. Thank you very much. Obviously, a lot going on. Before we, given the time, I think maybe we'll take a few minutes for questions on Brazil. Then we'll move to Canada and take questions on Canada, and then and then we can go around the horn and talk about any other questions that people may have. But does anyone have any particular questions about Brazil? I know there's a lot that's, on the what to expect list. So maybe you could just very kind of quickly help us issue spot the current landscape and what you expect might change given the forthcoming guidance. So if we were to engage a processor in Brazil today, what does that look like in terms of requirements for the processor? And then if we were to, and then how do you expect that might change? And then I'd ask you a similar question about data breach incidents involving, data in other countries, but of, Brazilian citizens, residents, or data subjects.
Yeah, we have already faced situations of data breaches involving board type of data breaches that involve Brazilians, or what we call obviously Brazilian data. As you may know, Brazilian LGPD is very similar to GDPR, and the context of the LGPD is that it also has this extraterritorial broad. So when we talk about data that has some sort of connection with Brazil, in most cases, our authorities are very eager to understand what may happen, what may have happened in a data breach. So for instance, we were involved in a couple of big incidents in the world, and we had to inform the Brazilian authority about the circumstances, what happened, what if there was any effect, what kind of data was leaked, why it was leaked. So, and but it was more of an informational type of request, especially because our clients were very cooperative with the authority. We understand that this is a way to deal with the authority in Brazil, at least for now. And because we were cooperative, nothing happened in terms of penalties or any sort of behavior recommendation. We don't expect this to change, right? I don't think that with the current authority, that should be how they will react, moving on. But we may have even more explanations, even more, let's say, rules connected to that with respect to timelines, with respect to what kind of data leak you have to really inform, because nowadays is a bit flexible, right? You have your own interpretation. So we expect to have more guidance on that. So I don't think that much will change in the scenario with respect to data breach. I don't know if Carla wants to talk about the processor.
Yeah.
Part.
So one of the differences that we have in our law in comparison with the GDPR is that we do not have much regulation or rules in connection with the agreements with data processors. So there are no requirements. It is not an obligation to have an agreement with the data processor, and no minimum requirements for that. Depending on the sector of the company, I mean, on the industry, for instance, banks and insurance companies, they are subject to more requirements when hiring a data processor, but this is not in connection with the LGPD. This is connection with cybersecurity regulations of their sectors. So as for data processors, I mean, they have the obligation to comply with the law in Brazil, but there is not what we see that is that currently the focus is not on them, is on the data controllers.
Got it. Great. Any other questions related to Brazil before we move north to Canada? Well, thank you both very much. That was very helpful. Well done. Thanks again.